Welcome to week 1 of the Keto Marathon training. My name is Aaron, this is a Fat for Weight Loss video. Let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few different aspects of what happened this week, and I'm going to show you some of the footage I took out whilst I was running, and I'm going to break down all of the training periods and the training runs for you so that you can do the same, hopefully, if you're running the Gold Coast Marathon or another marathon that you're looking to train for as a ketogenic athlete. I hope this video is going to be really beneficial for you. It is only week 1, so there's a lot more that I need to learn when it comes to marathon training, but I definitely think there is some really juicy information in here, especially even if you are not keto. This is going to help your running immensely. So let's get started with the sticky details. My overall running was 30 kilometers this week, so it's pretty easy, pretty slow. That's what, 18.5 miles. So it's not a huge amount of running in terms of a normal marathon runner, but I haven't run that much. I was looking at Strava the other day and I haven't run that much since July last year. I went on a big cycling trip, so I did lots of cycling, but nothing really substitutes the aerobic endurance and the capacity to run like running does. You can't really substitute anything else for running to get better at running, because you just have to go out and run more, right? Rule number 1, run more. Run slow and run more. Anyway, so 30 Ks, 18.5 miles. Running time was about 3.5 hours. So in total, that was over 3 runs. And I'm going to show you some of the gear that I used. And that might change over the next 12 weeks, but mostly this stuff is going to stay pretty consistent. So the number 1 thing that I use and I recommend to everyone is getting some sort of training watch. Now I use a Garmin Forerunner 235. Now this one has the heart rate built into it, and it's really important when you're training for a ketogenic marathon is that your heart rate is very important when you are training, because you need to be in an aerobic zone. Something that I didn't do this week, but we'll get to that later. But that is the watch that I use. The shoes that I use are Asics. They are the Keano 23s, I think. I think they've only got 200 or 300 Ks on them, so I'll probably need to switch those out in the next 12 weeks. But they are fantastic shoes and they fit very well. They are good because they have a good cross support in them, so they don't bend and flex. Asics are very good running shoes. Brooks also do good running shoes, and depending on whether you're running trails or not, there's other brands as well, but I like to use Asics running shoes. Now, I've also been using a Optimum Neo blood glucose meter. Now, this also does ketone as well. You just need to buy the strips, but it's pretty accurate and it's really good for testing both blood glucose and ketones. Now those are important. I'm going to get to those in a second, but that is the device that I use for doing that. So, all right, let's get to the running. I did 3 runs this week. I broke that up into an interval run, and a tempo run, and a long run. Now the interval run was 5.4 kilometers, which is about 3.4 miles. So this is my first run of the entire 12 weeks. It's going to be a 5K, so it's in 1 kilometer intervals. Looking to pace around 4 minutes 44 per kilometer, but we'll see how that goes. Alright, just finished. That was a little bit harder than I was expecting. 4 minutes 40 is relatively fast when you're unfit. So I think, and there goes my timer, that was more probably around 5 minutes. 5 minute 1K intervals. So I guess part of this is not caring about the time really, so that was pretty good. It was fun. The tempo run was 8.5 kilometers and about 5.2 miles. Hey everyone. So I'm running 9.5 kilometers today. It's first time I've run this distance in a very long time. So we'll see how it goes. I'm probably going to take it pretty slow and keep it cruisy, keep it aerobic, and keep it locked in. Ooh. Alright, so I just finished my run and it was supposed to be 9.5 kilometers, but I had such a hard time trying to keep it in an aerobic heart rate, so I cut it short, and it's kind of frustrating, but it also means that I have a lot of work to do, which is a good thing. You always got to look at things from the positive side, and if you don't, start doing something new. And the long run was 16 Ks, which is about 10 miles. Now, those runs, the miles aren't huge and the Ks aren't huge, but the 16K was pretty intense. Running 30Ks straight away from not running at all is a fair amount of volume to start off in week one. And, it's something that I've got to do, and I think it's only going to get worse from here. Alright, so today is probably one of the most important days of the week. It is the long run. And so training for a marathon, you need to get a good amount of long runs in. Today it's going to be about 17.5 kilometers. I'm not sure how many miles that is, but I'm going to bring you along with for the journey. I look pretty happy right now because it's nice and cool in the morning, but I guarantee you by the time I get back I'm going to look like a drowned rat, and I am probably going to start hating being on my feet, but let's see how it goes. Alright, so I'm 7 Ks in. I'm doing about 6-minute Ks, which is probably a little bit fast and probably a little bit faster than I would have expected, but that is okay. Probably going to slow down a little bit in the last 9 kilometers. As you can hear, I'm still panting a little bit, but I'm going to start breathing through my nose, and I'm going to start watching my steps a little bit as well, because I starting to feel a little bit heavy in the legs. Alright, so just past the 10K mark. It's getting really hard to stay underneath the threshold heart rate zone, so I think I'm just going to have to go, and I'm just going to have to run the distance and keep it pretty slow. I've been breathing through my nose, which has helped a lot. My legs are feeling pretty heavy, so another 7.5 Ks to go. Whew. Okay, so I am 14 Ks into the run, and I've pretty much walked the last 2 Ks nearly, because I bonked. Went out too fast, went up too many hills, too much kilometers in too short of a distance, and also I haven't run in a long time, so I just don't have the endurance anymore. Really interesting concept. Now I've got to try and struggle the 2 Ks of the way home and get some food into me, but I definitely probably haven't switched over to enough of fat burning, so I need to increase my fat intake or do something, because this sucks. Alright, so just finished. I only got 16 Ks. I was supposed to do 17.5, but that's alright. It was pretty difficult. It took me just under 2 hours, or a little over 2 hours to complete, whatever it was. That was tough. I'm in trouble for the marathon. I am in trouble. That was only 16 Ks. I need to double and half that again. So yeah, let's see how this 12 weeks training goes. Anyway, those were the runs, and those are what I've split up all of my workouts throughout the entire 12 weeks. It's always going to be an interval, a tempo, and a long run. I want to jump into heart rate zones, because heart rate zones are very, very important when you're trying to run a ketogenic marathon and when you're trying to run in the aerobic zone anyway. So Phil Maffetone is a guy who has created the 180 formula. Now, you may have already heard about this, but I'm going to just explain it a little bit. Basically what it is it's 180 minus your age. That gives you the top end of your aerobic heart zone that you should be targeting. So that's the top, and then you minus 10 from that to get your bottom. So for me, that's 153 is my top aerobic heart rate zone, and 143, which is my bottom. So anywhere in between there is good to be running at an aerobic zone, and that is where you pretty much get a 50-50 split between ketones and glucose. Now, some people might be a little bit different. Some people might be able to run a little bit harder or a little bit softer, but it really depends on your age and the amount of times you've been sick this year, and also if you're taking any medication or anything like that. So go ahead and check that out. The link for that is below. Now I'm going to break up the runs that I did this week and break them up into what heart rate zones I was in for those. Now the interval run, now these heart rates are probably what was my downfall for this week. And it's really hard because I've run fast half marathons, I've run fast 5Ks, I've run fast 10Ks, and the majority of those runs have been in a completely anaerobic zone for me. And I've pushed anywhere up to 200 beats per minute. And you know, it's really hard for me to just try and slow down. So that was really difficult for me this week, and I'll show you in the stats a little bit here. So in the first run, only 16% of it was aerobic. Now this is an interval run, so I guess that's sort of fine. 49% of it was anaerobic. I probably would have liked that to be more. And I'm probably going to do more of that next week. So more anaerobic in the interval run, and you know, the aerobic's probably fine. But yeah, definitely hitting that zone 4 and zone 5 in those intervals because you want it to be punchy, right? Now the tempo run, that was 27% aerobic and 58% anaerobic. Now, when I say anaerobic, I'm including zone 5 and zone 4. Zone 4 is like a tempo zone, and zone 5 is extremely anaerobic, and that is when you're pushing extreme heart rates and you can't breathe properly and you're getting really into that oxygen deprived zone. Now, that for a tempo run is probably bad because I guess maybe it's okay. I think 27% aerobic and 56% anaerobic is probably a warm up and a cool down either side, and then trying to branch that middle point to be a tempo. So in terms of a heart rate zones, that's probably about spot on, but I was trying to make it a long run, right? I was trying to keep it mostly in that aerobic heart rate zone, and 27%, that was not aerobic at all. So I really need to, if I'm going to do those tempo runs as long runs, I really need to slow down and make sure that all of it is in the aerobic heart rate zone, even if that requires walking. Now, which brings me onto the long run. Now, I just got back from the long run, and oh boy. Okay, it was 20% aerobic and 56% anaerobic. Now, whatever the difference is, was below the aerobic heart rate zone. But that's bad for a long run, and I really felt it. And what happened was I bonked, right? And what bonking is that it means that you have completely depleted you're burning too much glycogen in your body, which is your stored version of sugar, essentially, and you're not using enough ketones. Now, as I said before, in that full maftone heart rate zones, you need to be in the aerobic zone to be able to burn a 50-50% of ketones and blood glucose. Now, what happens when you run out of blood glucose is your blood sugar drops dramatically, and it means you have to stop, and it puts you into a state of hyperglycemia. And basically what that means is that your blood sugar drops too low, you can't function properly, and you have to stop. You have to either intake sugar, or you just have to slow down, and you have to regain your thoughts and everything. And it's not a nice place to be in, and I was in that place this morning, and it's, I think it was mainly because not enough of it was aerobic, so I need to slow it down more. And there's a big hill at the start, so I was charging up this hill. I've done this training run so many times. I've done it fast, but when you're trying to be a ketogenic runner, you need to make sure that most of your training is in that aerobic zone. And I failed to comply with that, and I basically hit I hit kilometer 14 and died, right? And it was a bit of a struggle home, so I don't recommend that. And so that's one of the improvements I will be doing next week. So enough about heart rate zones. I was doing some blood sugar readings. Now, this is interesting because I haven't really done blood sugar I haven't really done blood sugar readings before whilst training, and I'm also doing ketone readings. So this is going to be interesting over the next 12 weeks, because what happens is that when you start burning too much glycogen, your blood sugar drops dramatically. And that is exactly what I saw when I did the long run. Now, I didn't record anything for the interval run. I will be doing that next week, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens when I test my glucose and ketones for that. Now, I did test it for the tempo run. The tempo run, so before the workout, it was 4.6 millimoles, which is about 82 milligrams per deciliter, which is about right, and that's a good fasted blood sugar reading. Now, when I got back from the tempo run, it was actually 4.2 millimoles, which is about 76 milligrams per deciliter. So that's sort of bordering on becoming low. Now, the ranges for blood sugar levels are anywhere between 70 and 100 is considered normal. So once you start going below 70, it can be a little bit troublesome. But what happens is that when you have elevated ketone levels, going lower than 70 can actually be achieved. You just have to do it carefully. And with that elevated ketone level, your body's still got enough energy, but your blood sugar is just a little bit low. So, but I did a long run, and I didn't test my blood sugar levels before I went out in the long run. But when I got back, I did measure it, and they were 2.8 millimoles per, 2.8 millimoles, which is about 50 milligrams per deciliter. Now that's low. That's 20 points below what is considered low. And that is why I bonked, and that's why I came back and I felt pretty terrible. And as you've probably seen from the videos that I showed you, I was in a bad state. I wasn't in an extremely bad state, but it's not something that is enjoyable to be in. That total bonked feeling sucks, and it really ruins training. So those are the blood sugar levels and the ketone readings. Well, actually, no, I didn't give you any ketone readings. The only ketones that I tested was after the long run, and they were at 2.2 millimoles, which is good, which is about, anywhere between 1.5 and 3 is a really good space to be in for ketones, especially if you're trying to use them for aerobic exercise. That's a good place to be in with ketones. Now, I wanted to share a few books and a few people that I've been following with you that are really, backing me and backing the low carb science, and also a little bit of the keto endurance and keto ultra endurance stuff. So number one, I want to mention all of my buddies that are on Instagram. So Dave from Anti-Gravity Gains, Aaron from AD Keto, and also the Keto Dad. He is doing a long bike ride as well. So if you haven't seen any of their YouTube videos or any of their YouTube channels, they are linked below. Those guys are fantastic, and I will be supporting them along the way because they are doing similar stuff. The Keto Dad is doing it on a bike, but same thing applies. And we're going to have a bit of a community here, which is fantastic. Now, I also wanted to highlight a few books that I've been reading, or have read actually. So let's start with the Art and Science of Low Carb Performance. Now, that is written by Jeff Volek and Stephen Finney. Those guys have put together a book that is like the Bible of low carb exercise, or like keto endurance. And they have a few points in that book that I wanted to highlight to you that might interest you if you did want to read that book. So they talk about the monocarbolic acid transporters, and how if you have an elevated level of ketone, or if you have elevated levels of ketones, it means that your lactic acid production is going to be inhibited a little bit. And it also means that you can uptake some of that lactic acid back into your energy system. Now, that's really, really important, because lactic acid is it really inhibits your threshold level. When you're trying to push really, really hard, you start building up lactate. And what happens is that your muscles become totally restricted, and that lactic acid is like that burning feeling in your muscles. So what happens if you have elevated levels of ketones, it can actually upregulate and recycle some of that lactic acid, and you can use it again, right? Another important thing that they cover in the book is the effect of inflammation on Vo2 Max. Now, there is a pretty, I think from what I've read, there's a pretty direct correlation between excess inflammation and Vo2 Max numbers. If you have a lot of inflammation, your Vo2 Max is going to be lower no matter what you do. So that's really impressive, and that's really important. Another thing as well is that when you get into running ultra or marathon distances, you're going to be producing a lot of oxidative stress. Now, what happens on the ketogenic diet is that you can actually lower the amount of oxidative stress you produce in your body. Now, I don't understand exactly the reasons why and the science behind that, but basically they break it down and they say that in the presence of ketones, oxidative stress is reduced, which is super fantastic, because oxidative stress and inflammation are one of the bad side effects of doing endurance exercise. So if you can eliminate that, or at least reduce that, that is fantastic. So that is going to be something I want to try and do as well. Low blood glucose. Now, I said before, my blood glucose was 50 milligrams per deciliter, which is low, right? But that is in a state of hyperglycemia. And what happens if you have elevated ketone levels, and this is highlighted in the book, if you have elevated ketone levels, you're not going to go into a coma, and you're not going to show all of the terrible signs that you can exhibit from having hyperglycemia. So when I bonked, I knew that I was bonking. I could feel it. I was like, I know that feeling. It's coming on. And I basically had to walk for a K and a half in there to sort of regain my heart rate level and regain the amount of blood glucose that was in my body. So when you're relying on a ketogenic diet, you're still making blood glucose, but you're trying to get it from other sources, so from ketones. Sometimes you can actually get it from your liver, so your liver's going, bang, I need to get all of the blood glucose out of there as well, and other sources as well. Another interesting topic that is covered in that book is that your metabolic rate is actually decreased when you start doing exercise. Now, this is not something that people like to hear. When you go out and do exercise, you're like, oh, because I did a 300 calorie run, I can have an extra 300 calories because that's how science works. And unfortunately, this book highlights the fact that your metabolic or your resting metabolic rate can actually decrease from anywhere between 5 and 15%. So that's something really interesting, and it is something that is quite important when you're trying to track macros and calories and all that sort of stuff. So just keep that one in mind. Now, there is another book that is called the Primal Endurance, and that one is by Mark Sisson and Brad Kearns, and that one's really, really important, and it is more aimed at athletes trying to bridge the gap between the high carb or pre-diabetes state and going low carb and still being an athlete, right? And what he highlights is the fact that you have to slow down, and it's harder to do than it is to say. Slowing down is pretty terrible as an athlete, because you've built up that endurance, you build up that metabolic flexibility to be able to hit those really high numbers, and then you're saying, okay, I have to slow down because my heart rate's too high, which is good, and it prevents a lot of oxidative stress and all that sort of stuff, but it's hard, right? And so what he is saying is that, and exactly what I'm trying to do, is that you have to lower your heart rate, and you have to train in that lower heart rate. And eventually, over time, what happens is if you go out and you start doing 7-minute kilometers, and that's your aerobic zone, that is the top of your aerobic zone, 7-minute kilometers, whatever that is in miles. And then the next week, you might be at 6 minutes 50 in that same heart rate, because you've got fitter, and because you're building that aerobic zone, you've increased your pace, right? And then a week later, it might be 6:30, and then it might be, 6 minutes, and then it might be 5 minutes 30. And what you're doing is you're basically improving your aerobic capacity to a pace that you are still in your aerobic heart rate zone, but you're still running at an aerobic pace. And that's exactly what you want if you're running a low carb keto marathon. So that book is really interesting to read. Also, everything that Ben Greenfield does is really important. He has also done a keto triathlon, and he goes into all of his blood work and all of that sort of stuff. So that is a very interesting thing to read. He has also got a book called The Low Carb Athlete, and it's by Ben Greenfield Fitness. He does talk on something that's called super starch, and basically it is a modified corn starch that is extracted in a way, or it is, produced in a way that does not spike your blood glucose. It maintains a healthy blood glucose throughout an endurance event. So that might be something that could be interesting to try on my longer training runs, because as I said, I was running too fast, I was running too hard, I went out and I bonked, right? And the bonking is basically the lowered blood glucose level. It's because your body can't produce enough blood glucose. Now, what happens with super starch is that you can effectively maintain that throughout your entire run. Now, I'm not saying that you should be doing that on your first keto marathon, and that's something that Dave from Anti-Gravity Gains has also said. He's like, you need to do your first marathon strict keto. Don't worry about anything else, and you'll get there. In hindsight, so these are the things I need to prepare for next week. Now, I need to figure out how to slow down. I need to set an alarm on my watch or something that says, slow down. You are running in an incorrect heart rate, and that is something you can do on the Garmin Forerunner. I need to be maintaining an aerobic heart rate, and I need to be building that aerobic base, because if I keep running in the anaerobic zone, I'm not actually improving in the aerobic space. So that's really important. Another thing is that I need to figure out a way on how to take water and electrolytes with me, because I know that electrolytes are really, really important on the ketogenic diet, and that is something that I have avoided this week because I have no way of carrying it. So whether I need one of those runner's vests with the water bottles in there or something, but it's generally more for the long runs. You need to focus on electrolytes. Now, whether you create an electrolyte mix of your own or you use a pre-bought product, that is up to you, but it is something I'm going to be experimenting with next week. And another thing I want to experiment with is training with foods along the way. So things like almond butter and things like MCT oil. So I hope you've got a lot of beneficial information out of this video. I'm going to try and do this every single week. It is a good way for me to try and improve and look back on the stats. And it's also something that you can probably use in your training as well. So if you're looking to do a marathon and you're trying to do any sort of endurance activity using the ketogenic diet, then all of these principles will apply to you. So again, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already considered subscribing, make sure you do so, because every single week for the next 12 weeks, I'm going to be breaking down my training and how it applies to all sorts of endurance activities. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.